Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we're going to be getting into everything involving seasonal modifiers. Since the latest update for the Division 2 went live this week, I've seen a lot of conversation and confusion surrounding this new system. Now, I do want to have a broader discussion about how these have landed with the community, but today I first just wanted to explain just about everything I can with the seasonal modifiers, demystify them a little bit, if you will. I continue to see a lot of people saying that they don't know why they're dying. There's random icons appearing over enemies' heads, they just don't know what's happening. So, by the end of this video, you should have all of the information you need about this new system. When it's all said and done, some of you will prefer to just turn these off and leave them off. That's totally fine. But as you might have noticed in the background gameplay, the potential with these things can be kind of crazy. So if you're curious or you just want some more information on what's going on, let's get into this. Alright, so let us begin with the basics of the seasonal modifier system, including how do I view and interact with these modifiers, how do I turn them on and off depending on if I want to use them in gameplay. Well, it's quite simple. All you have to do is to go into your inventory and you will see that up next to your specialization there is a new node here to access your Isaac watch. You click on that and this takes you into the modifier menu. To my recollection, this entire thing is enabled by default when you log into the new update, so in case you want to turn this off and forget about them and just not use them, you can see down at the bottom there's a button to deactivate. If I hit that, it turns them off. This can be done from anywhere in the game so long as you are not in combat. So even while you're out in the world, if you want to turn these off or turn them back on, as you'll see I can do that too, it'll disable and re-enable the system, again as long as you're not in combat. Now, one important thing to point out, and this has already become a hot point of contention within the community, whether or not you are playing with modifiers within group content depends on the group leader, right? If they have the system turned on, then it's going to be on for everybody else as well. Personally, I think there needs to be a lot of work done there to better indicate that in terms of matchmaking, and when you join a new group, there also seems to be some issues where your own modifiers will not be turned on if the group leader has theirs on, but the enemy modifiers will be active. It gets a little confusing, but just know for now that in group content you do have to be aware of if other people have theirs turned on as well. Alright, now there are four main components to the seasonal modifier system, and we're going to go through those one by one. And that all begins with the Global Modifier. So if we go back into our modifier menu, you will see that up the top right here is where the Global Modifier is listed, and for the season that is called Point Blank. Now, before even getting into the specifics of this modifier, it's important to note that the Global Modifier is the cornerstone upon which all of the other aspects to the modifier system is based upon, right? The base rules and mechanics that the Global Modifier lays out is what every other part of the system builds upon. So, for this season again, it is called Point Blank, and it reads there are 3 range zones within variable distances, short, medium, and long range. Depending on the distance to the target, weapon damage is amplified by a fixed percentage. Within short range, you get 1.2 times amplified damage, within medium range 1.35, and within long range 1.5. No bonuses applied past the distance threshold. And to help you understand how that is happening in real time and in your gameplay, we have some new UI augmentations that help you, like I said, understand what's going on. So when you aim at an enemy while the system is turned on, you will see that on the left side of my crosshair there, we have this whole new dial, which denotes what ranges we're going to be fighting at. So the blue, yellow, and red colors that you're seeing there dictate those 3 different ranges that we just read off within the point blank description. So the blue is the short range. Anytime you're aiming at an enemy and that white little marker is within the blue constraints, that means that you're getting 1.2 times amplified damage. Then if we aim at something a bit further away, you will see it switches to the yellow color there. That means we're getting the medium damage range zone at 1.35 amplified damage. And finally, something much farther away, like this ad back here, goes into the red zone for that 1.5 times. So that is the base mechanic of this to understand, again, which all of these other parts that we're about to go over build upon. It's these 3 range zones that you have in combat whenever you're aiming at an enemy. And this also plays into where enemies are standing in relation to you, right? Some of the descriptions for these additional modifiers that we're going to talk about say things like when enemies are within the medium range. You don't necessarily have to be aiming at an enemy for that to be true. If they're just standing within, however far this is, 20 meters, then they are within your medium range, and that counts for this entire system. Now, before we get into some of the other more customizable elements of the seasonal modifier system, I wanted to talk about like the global modifier, the one other static thing that is going to stay the same for everybody that is interacting with this feature. And those are the hostile modifiers. So again, if we go back into the modifier menu, you'll see that on controller, I can click down on my left stick. On PC, it'll be a different keybind to view the hostile modifier menu. So these 4 symbols and modifiers with their descriptions here are 4 different abilities basically that enemies can have on them when you go into combat. So if you see any of these 4 symbols above an enemy's head while you're fighting, that means that they have this modifier, as you can read on the right side, equipped. So it's important to become at least vaguely familiar with what each of these do, and you can always go back in and read what these are in case you need to brush up. But let's quickly cover the two that I think people are running into the most in gameplay. I know I've already seen a lot of comments about this specific one that we're looking at right here. So requital is tied to the snake icon. If you see the one with the serpent eating its own tail, that means they have requital. And it reads, shooting at an enemy within medium range builds stacks of requital. For every stack, a portion of the damage dealt will be reflected back to you. The amount of damage received is directly proportional with the amount of requital stacks. Shooting an enemy from a different range zone resets the stacks. So the number one thing that I've seen so far in relation to seasonal modifiers has been, why am I dying when I shoot different enemies? And that would be because they have requital. So if we go back to the range here, any enemy that you engage that has this on, again, you'll see it over their head, that's in the yellow medium zone, like this target would be right here. If they had requital and I were to shoot them, then a certain amount of that damage would be reflected back at me. So if you have something like an AR and you're just laying into an enemy and you don't realize that they have that, then yeah, pretty soon you're going to down yourself. Fortunately, the solution isn't too hard. All you have to do is reposition, and as soon as you get them into the short range, for example, let's pretend this was the same enemy, then you could shoot them just fine and none of that damage would be reflected back at you. There are also many different ways you could manipulate that modifier with the passive and active ones, but we'll get into that momentarily. So that is requital. The only other one I wanted to really dive into here was stellite coating. It reads, enemies receive a mark corresponding to a specific range zone. Marked enemies receive 60% less damage when hit from outside the indicated range zone. Each hit from the correct range zone partially removes the effect until completely removed. So this one, again, as you're seeing right here, is the pearl icon. And so if you see this above an enemy's head, this is what they have active. This one specifically as well will come in 3 colors instead of just the black and white like all of the others are. And so if you see this above an enemy's head in either red, yellow, or blue coloring, that just represents the zone of the shield that you need to break. So if this enemy had a blue version of the stellite coating icon above their head, then I would shoot them and I would begin to break the shield because I'm fighting them within the short range. Similarly, if one of these ones had a yellow version of stellite coating on them, then I would need to shoot them in the medium range and that would break the shield. But yes, the hostile modifiers are certainly a very important part of this whole thing to be aware of. But again, feel free to refer back to this at any time to see the icons, read the descriptions, and become more familiar with them. Next, let's get into active modifiers, where we start to have a little bit of fun with this. So one more time, back into the menu, and underneath the global modifier, we have all of these slots. But the first one let's take a look at is the active right here. If you click on that, you're going to see 3 different choices. Now, I only have one of these unlocked so far, but it should be representational enough to show you how these work. Active modifiers, as the name suggests, is an ability that you get to activate that changes the rules of the overall base global modifier. Again, point blank is what dictates everything, but the active modifiers start to really manipulate those and let you mess around with them. So, for this one that I have unlocked, and just to note, you unlock these by doing the seasonal journey. They're rewarded from tiers 4, 5, and 6, in case you didn't know. But reversal says you swap the damage bonuses and equipped passive modifiers between short and long ranges for a limited time, increasing each zone's amplified bonus damage by 25%. The total duration can be extended for each headshot within the 2 distances up to a maximum of 100% of its initial duration, cooldown of 50 seconds. So that probably sounds very confusing, but let's slot this in and I'll show you how it works. So we click that, it's now locked in, it's saved to our loadout here. So now if we go to the range, I'm going to set this to a bit of a higher veterancy so that they can take a few of the shots. This one specifically deals with flipping the 2 zones. So obviously the overall thing that we're looking at has short and long range locked in. And while we're waiting, I'll point out that the cooldown for these active abilities, you can actually see it happening right now on the lower half of the dial. You can see that gray bar filling up. Whenever you use the ability, it will then deplete, and then this will slowly refill. And you'll see that as soon as that gray bar gets to the top, we'll then be able to activate reversal once again. Alright, so now that we have reversal ready on controller, you click up on the D-pad to activate it, and you'll see that that flips the 2 range zones. Now the close one is red, and the far one is blue. So I need to get some kills to keep this active. But this unlocks a lot of possibilities, as we'll get into. The most baseline and noteworthy one is that this flips the damage zones, so that instead of the close range being 1.2 times amplified damage, it's now the 1.5 that you would normally get for enemies at the much longer range. But you'll see now that reversal has expired, it flips the blue and red back to where they were, and things are back to standard. So that is just one example of an active modifier. Again, there are 3 in total for this season, and they each do their own different unique things. You can read about them and try them out once you unlock them. But the active modifiers are a very good platform to begin manipulating this entire system to your benefit. And that really plays into, as the description of this one suggests, the passive modifiers. So let's now take a look at those. If I back out of here, we then have these 3 categories down here, and this is where you can slot in your passive modifier. So if I go in here, you'll see there's an entire tree. You can farm and unlock all of these by doing priority objectives. You'll see that I have almost all of them. I need to get these last two. But what these are essentially little mini talents and abilities that you get to activate in relation to the overall seasonal modifier, again, the point blank modifier, that can grant you some crazy additional damage. So they're broken down this season between short range, medium range, long range, and multi-zone. All that means is that these individual ones are only active within those range zones. So if I wanted to use, for example here, drawback, impatient, or liability, it says right under the name, effective range, short range. So these abilities only activate on enemies or within the conditions of the short range. So for example, if we read drawback, weapon handling is increased by 50% of headshot damage while they're enemies within the short range. Or we could look at something within the medium range. If we go to retribution here, effective range, medium, shooting enemies within the medium range builds up to 100 stacks. For every stack, you gain 0.5 crit chance, lose 1 stack for every bullet fired after reaching 100. Same properties, of course, apply to this row. They're only effective within the long range. Then these last ones are multi-zone, and they have their own unique conditions there. But that is the general idea, is that these passive modifiers are extra little talents that you get to slot in to modify and customize your experience. But you just need to be aware of which zones and what conditions you need in order to proc them. But where some of the creativity and stuff comes in is how you use these in combination with the active modifier. So for example, because we have reversal here, which swaps our short and long ranges, that means that these two categories of passive modifiers, the short range ones and the long range ones, they flip in their functionality for the duration of that active modifier. So for example, this one right here is that headshot damage is increased by 150%, but body shots deal greatly reduced damage at long range. Typically, you're only going to be able to take advantage of this for enemies who are super far away and within that long range. But if we equip this, for example, and we were to activate the reversal active modifier, that means that we can get that huge boost in headshot damage for enemies that are right in front of us. So let me do that right here. That's active. I'm going to activate reversal. Now the red is close range, and you can see that's a boss that I'm 3-tapping. I think I can get it down to a 2-tap right there, right? So that is where this whole system kind of unlocks and allows you to be really creative with how you're setting up all of your bonuses. The other thing to be aware of with all of this is how this impacts the enemy modifier. So if we go back to the hostile descriptions here, one example I can give is that obviously everybody's freaking out about requital right now because of how often they're shooting themselves to death. Well, for example, if we go and look at a different active modifier that I have unlocked called All Out here, you can read what it says. When activated, you will have 10 seconds to eliminate an enemy in any range zone, and that zone will now count for the entire spectrum. What that means is that if you kill an enemy within the short range, your entire bar that you would be looking at, the dial, would all be entirely blue. So what that would mean is that then no enemies are benefited by requital, because anywhere any range you're shooting them from is considered the short range for the duration of that active modifier. So I know that probably sounds very confusing, but the overall point I'm trying to make is that there is a lot of depth with this system to be able to manipulate all of these different rule sets. Even if you don't like how one little condition of it works, there's a very good chance that by equipping different passive modifiers, by utilizing the active ones differently, by putting a different build together to support that, you can manipulate the situation and turn it to your own advantage. And that is what I think is most unique about the system. That's what I'm looking forward to continuing to mess around with and experiment with in the coming days and weeks. So there you go. I hope that general overview helps you comprehend what's going on here a little bit better. So, there you have it, my friends. That is a breakdown of the brand new seasonal modifier system that has been added to the Division 2, and an in-depth explanation of the point blank modifier specifically that is active for this current season. I truly hope that this helped clear some things up across the board. As I said, I know there's been a lot of confusion going around. Certainly, if you do have any lingering questions after everything we went over, do leave them down below and I will do my best to clear up what I can. Additionally, however, I would be curious to hear your first thoughts about this overall system. I do plan to discuss this all more, so feel free to stay tuned for that. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you're thinking for now. If you did enjoy the video and it helped you out and you want to see more stuff like it on the Division 2, then I hope you will consider clicking that subscribe button if you're not already. The coverage for Year 6 Season 2 is just getting underway. I got a lot more coming your way. But that is going to do it for me today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, RogueGold. Ow.